The first maxim is that of quality. In other words, we assume that if somebody's going to be speaking, it's that the material they say is going to be of quality content. If we were to say it another way, we would say that we expect that what these people are saying is true. We're expecting that they're not going to be telling us a bunch of BS, right? It's quality content, it's not crap. We assume that people are telling the truth because it's a generally safe assumption. If you look at most of the communication we have, probably most of it is true communication. People don't often intend to lie. I don't know what percentage of the time you might estimate people try to lie, but I would say it's probably less than 10%, maybe less than 1 even, I don't know. But probably not often do we intend to lie. Usually we intend to tell people things that are true. If we do end up telling something that's not true, oftentimes it's assumed by the hearer that it's not an intentional falsehood, that rather it's an exaggeration, or that it's trying to communicate by parable or hyperbole some principle that can't be communicated literally. And so we assume that, I guess that first maxim is just that we assume that what's coming out of this person's mouth is going to be of quality content. The second maxim is relation. In other words, we assume that given a couple of sentences, that the sentences will be related to each other, that the second sentence will follow from the first. An example that's given here in the text on page 438 is, Kathy felt very dizzy and fainted at her work. She was carried away unconscious to a hospital. Now, it's possible that Kathy was carried away unconscious to a hospital because she had a heart attack or a stroke, and that it was from her home that she was carried away. It's possible that this second sentence is not really related to the first one, that she felt dizzy and fainted at her work, and then that days or weeks later she had a stroke event and was carried away unconscious to a hospital. But we assume that those two sentences are related to each other, they're connected in some way, and because we make this inference, we don't have to spell out that she was carried away unconscious to a hospital because she fainted at her work. We don't have to say every detail precisely because we make these inferences about relation. The chapter then talks about this second maxim in an applied situation, language at large, in that box 11.2, about implying things or even lying in advertising. And it gives some examples of, for instance, in the show Mad Men, that in the first episode of that show, there were the advertisers were trying to make an advertisement for cigarettes, and they had just been banned from saying that they were healthy because recent research had shown that they weren't in fact healthy. So they couldn't say something like they had been saying before. So instead, they said they wanted to say, "It's toasted," as their company slogan. Of course, every kind of cigarette tobacco is toasted. So that was not unique, but they're implying something by saying that it's toasted and assuming that the individuals hearing this commercial will use maxim 2 of relation and know that, if it's toasted is said here, then that must be related to the fact that or it must be related to the cigarettes in some fashion. In fact, we're going to infer further that it's toasted means that if it's worthy of saying, that it must be unique to this brand, that not all brands must be toasted, that there are some brands of lesser quality that aren't toasted, or perhaps that the process of toasting tobacco makes the cigarettes healthier. So these are inferences that people are that are being made. Implications that are being made, inferences that people are making about the material, about the commercial, that aren't necessarily true, and the advertisers are counting on us to follow these maxims, for instance, the maxim of relation, to believe that certain things are true that aren't necessarily said outright. Application Activity 2 in this class will take you on a little path through some additional advertisements that are implying things, and you'll be able to analyze them in light of these maxims. Maxim 3 is the maxim of quantity. This is, in other words, to say that the words you're using are going to be reductive in nature. You're going to use as few words as possible to get across the meaning. This is one reason why I value concision so much in student writing. It's important that we learn to cut out unnecessary words, and especially when we have the time to be able to consider our language. When I'm speaking on a recording like this, oftentimes I put in filler words because I'm buying myself time as I think. It's something that not only I do, but really everybody does, and I can't help it. It's just, it's something that's natural, it's something that has to occur. But when we're writing, we can cut out unnecessary words to bring down the length of an argument to a reasonable length. What we're doing there is we're cutting out stuff that doesn't need to be said because it can be implied. That's one thing that quantity can mean. The other thing that the maxim of quantity can mean is related to the scalar implicature. So if we're saying something with a quantity word, an amount word, then we're going to be using the most precise quantity word that we can. For instance, in box 11.3, we see that if somebody were to say, I like some kinds of pies, they're using the most precise word that they can to imply, I should say, that they don't like all kinds of pies. If they said, I like one kind of pie, technically that is true, but we are inferring from that they don't like more than one kind of pie. That may or may not be true. You could imply something that's not true by using the wrong scalar implicature. So you could say, I like one kind of pie. People will assume that you only like one kind of pie and that you don't like others because you've used the maxim of quantity. And that maxim is essentially saying you're going to use the most precise, the biggest scalar word that you can to encapsulate your meaning. Another example, or I guess I should just say a couple of additional examples there are given in box 11.3, but those are some two alternate meanings of the word quantity in the third maxim. The fourth maxim is that of manner, and this one speaks to the fact that we assume that there's going to be some sense of cohesion and reasonableness about a person's argument, that they're not just going to be just saying arbitrary and weird things. There's also this is also encapsulating the fact that there's order to the things that we say. For instance, this example here on page 442 says, Sam started hacking into his boss's email. He got fired. That would mean something very different than Sam got fired. He started hacking into his boss's email. We infer from the order of those two sentences that the first sentence happened prior to the second one. That doesn't necessarily have to be true given the words that are on the page, but it's something that we infer from it. So if you're not intending to say that, then you better be careful of the order you say things in. Another thing that manner suggests is that we say common phrases if we're trying to communicate a common thing. For instance, we will use the word eat if we're trying to communicate that we're eating lunch. But if we use some odd words to communicate the same thought, for instance, to insert food into my oral cavity, that technically means eat, but people will assume, because they're using the maxim of manner, they're going to assume that there's something going on with you in the fact that you're saying insert food into my oral cavity. Maybe you're trying to avoid using the word eat because you've got young children around and you don't want them to hear you talk about eating. You don't want to prime them to beg for lunch or something like that. But they're going to make that kind of assumption because they're assuming that your manner is going to be of a certain type. And if you don't use the type they're expecting, they're going to infer from that you're meaning something different. Anyway, those are the four maxims. And like I said, you're going to use those maxims to apply to different advertisements and talk about how those maxims are influencing the implications of the advertisements and the inferences that we're making.